Drop it. Everyone to the Friday Power Panel here on the Young Turks. I'm here, but nobody cares about that. What they do care about is that I'm joined by Adrian Lawrence and Rashad Ritchie. I've missed you guys. I can't wait to talk about the news with you.
Yes, very much looking forward to the show. Thank you.
We have a lot that we're going to be talking about. Not only the breaking news at the Capitol, obviously we're going to be leading with that in just a little bit. We've got a little bit more of the back and forth about the infrastructure bill, how the Republican Party is attempting to message around that. Some debate around the border. Who cares? Who's pretending to? We're gonna try to separate one from the other. And a little bit of positive labor news from a couple different countries around the world. That's exciting. Maybe that'll inspire America to act right for once when it comes to its working class. So we got that, we got more. You guys ready to jump into this?
Let's do it.
Yes.
Okay, let's do it. Earlier today, the Capitol had to briefly go back onto lockdown following a tragically fatal attack on the Capitol building with a vehicle ramming into a barricade, striking 2 officers. Both were injured, one later pronounced dead. The suspect was apparently shot after getting out of the car with a knife and attempting to attack the police officers. Now, we've been gradually getting some information since the morning. Robert Conti, the acting chief of the Metropolitan Police Department, said the attack near the US Capitol today, quote, does not appear to be terrorism related. It does not appear to be terrorism related, but obviously we'll continue to investigate to see if there is some type of nexus along those lines, which is just an amazing way to say that. Throughout the day, the FBI Washington field office was providing support to the US Capitol Police. The DC National Guard deployed an immediate response force made up of members of the National Guard to the Capitol complex today to support the US Capitol Police. And there are roughly 2,300 National Guard members in DC supporting the local, state, and federal authorities in DC. So they had a pretty immediate response, and they had a very quick sort of breakdown of the situation of the press, obviously learning some lessons, or at least wanting to reassure us that they've learned some lessons since what happened in January. But this is obviously incredibly serious, not just because of the attack, but because a Capitol police officer did lose their lives. What do you both make of this?
Well, on my end, I will tell you that it's very jarring. Again, this is such a close in time attack since January 6th, which was extremely terrifying. And it really said how vulnerable our nation is, especially the Capitol. And it is beneficial here that we didn't have Congress, as Congress is in recess right now. But seeing these Capitol police officers already reeling from that loss that happened on January 6th, or as a result of that, and now they have another fallen brother. It just really speaks to the fact that our nation has a problem with violence and that we need to address it and stop ignoring it.
Yeah, very sad, unfortunate, and we're still getting details, obviously, but here's something I want to point out. They were more prepared for this random act than they were for the planned terrorism attack that took place on January 6th. They were more coordinated for this random attack than coordinated white terrorists taking over the Capitol. And I think that's an element here that should be discussed. Obviously, they have learned some lessons, but to have this level of coordination, as well as this level of information dissemination, really within minutes after it happened, is something that we haven't seen before. And I'm hoping that this becomes the normative method for how they deal with attacks or even future acts of terrorism, God forbid, if it ever happens again at the nation's capital.
Yeah, I think that there's 2 elements that I would like to see to demonstrate learning from the events of the last year. I think you perfectly illustrated how they have to learn from all the problems from January. That was a terrible response in so many different ways. But I also think while there's been a lot of people replaced and this seems like a positive change, I also want to see a change from how they acted, several months earlier than that during the protests of the previous summer. So being a little bit, more Johnny on the spot when someone is attacking is important, but also understanding the difference between an armed insurrection and peaceful protesters and applying force where necessary, but also not applying force where it's not necessary. We don't have a good test case of that yet, but we'll see. If another round of protests eventually greets the Biden administration, hopefully the police will show more restraint than we saw in the previous year. In any event, as Adrian pointed out, thankfully Congress was not in session. There were still, of course, many people in the Capitol building, and there were members of Congress in the area as well. And so a message was sent to congressional offices saying, due to an external security threat, there was no entry or exit permitted at this time. You may move throughout the building, but stay away from exterior windows and doors. If you're outside, seek cover, which has got to be a terrifying message to receive, whether you're a staffer, a journalist in the area, something like that. And let's also remember, we had the individual who had weapons that was outside of what's going to become Kamala Harris's, the vice president's permanent address. So there's kind of a line of these events stretching back to the Capitol violence. And one has to wonder, is this going to be the last, at least for a little while?
And my fear is definitely that it's not. And I actually think that's probably almost a rational fear. The fact that this attack is now, it's something that came just about a week after officials removed those perimeter barriers, that fence that had that razor wire and really just roped off the complex that was a product of the January 6th insurrection. And so, the thought that, well, we let our guard down just a little bit and we have more attacks. It just speaks to the fact that we have a significant problem. And I know they're looking into the root of why this young man rammed the police officers there, but to automatically discount the fact that it's terrorism. We need to bear in mind that there is domestic terrorism that is going on every day on our soil. And to only limit it to this thought of international terrorism is really ignorant, unfortunately. And it puts us all in the mindset of thinking, that the problems come from the outside, as opposed to, no, the call is coming from inside the house, because it's been coming from inside the house for at least the last 4 years and then some.
I concur 100% with Adrian. I think it was premature for the executives and law enforcement to come out and basically say, according to their information, this has no relationship to terrorism. Let's be very clear. First of all, terrorism is the utilization of violence, criminality, coercion for political ends. That doesn't mean that the individual is for anything else. Domestic terrorism is a reality, and white males are the biggest portrayers of that. So there has to still be a real investigation before anybody can conclusively say this was not somehow politically motivated. And you have to imagine, if you intentionally try to attack anybody at the Capitol, how would that not have a political motivation somewhere?
Yeah, what is the alternative? That it was personal? I don't know. I mean, Look, we can say, okay, clearly the ideological motivation is more in line with terrorism than other descriptors, but we'd prefer to keep terrorism for events that are likely to produce a larger body count. We could have a rhetorical conversation like that, but there's information that could potentially come out. It seems like, sure, it was a much lower scale attack, but you don't attack the Capitol because you don't have any sort of political motivation. And we honestly, we don't know. There's very little we know about the individual. There has been a bit of information about them. I don't know that it's necessarily company policy. I don't read the names of these people generally, but this individual was armed with a large blade, people are saying, and was identified as a follower of the Nation of Islam. But that's the initial information. We don't have any other information about what the person believes politically, whether they've been particularly active recently. What we do know is that this country seems to have, its politics and the violence are more closely intertwined than at any point that I can remember, at least in my life of covering news. And having these events sort of occurring back to back, I don't know how much more information I need to be worried about that. I feel like regardless of the motivation, it's worrying.
Right, and let's keep it 100. Let's keep it 100, because you said something real powerful there, John. We have this connection now between violence and politics. The truth is, we have a reconnection between politics and violence, because the genesis of this country started with politics and violence. Yeah. The colonization of this country was politics and violence. There was a separation for a period of time, or at least optically a separation for a period of time. But even in the 60s, it was politics and violence. So now you have the folding of those elements on top of each other once again. And let's be real, the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, he had a lot to do with inviting this element back to mainstream political conversation, mainstream political narratives. And now you see the remnants of that continuing beyond his presidency in variations all across the country.
Yeah. Well, while a lot of members of Congress, senators were not in the area, some were, and we actually have a bit of video of Representative Ro Khanna, who had called in to CNN to talk about the experience, and I want to show you a bit of that video now.
The question we have to ask is, what is happening in our country where we have people coming in trying to use violence and knives and arms into the heart of American democracy, the monument of American democracy? I mean, this is what our country was founded to prevent violence, to say we solve disputes with debate and reasoned dialogue, and something is really just wrong with our nation.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much indisputable. I mean, there's just a glorification of violence, on the right, not only that, like Lindsey Graham, doing his little video of him shooting an AR-15 because military grade weapons are the most fun hobby in the world. But the incredible defensiveness towards the movement, and again, I don't know if this individual from today is a part of the movement that attacked the Capitol on January 6th, but this big and apparently growing movement of people who feel like violence is a legitimate tool in politics. How much defense did they receive from people like Ron Johnson and Lindsey Graham and people in the media like Tucker Carlson, implying that we should be more understanding towards the people that tried to hunt down and murder politicians? And so then they go back out there, and some have been tracked down and some have been arrested, but others have not, and others have been motivated by what they saw on January 6th. And so how many little ticking time bombs have we got sprinkled throughout the country now at this point, ready to attack the Capitol or a state capitol or something like that?
Yep, and it seems that with this, it's recognizing that there's a breakdown in our society, because the courts were created so that people could resolve disputes without resorting to violence. And the fact that people aren't using the courts because maybe they feel that they're corrupt, or they're not going to their political representative, their member of Congress, to lobby or to try to push to make change. It's this ideology out there that's letting people know that you can't really change how the corruption has impacted the system in which we live. And thus, they are resorting to violent means. They are embracing conspiracy theories. They feel like they don't have a lot of control over what's going on or avenues to change it. And thus, they are going for illegitimate means. And if we do not change the mentality and the understanding and the view of the vast majority of those in this nation, we are going to end up just essentially imploding.
Yeah. Well, we are going to take our first break. We come back, lots more news to get into, including the potential battle that's brewing over this infrastructure bill, battle coming from multiple sides, actually. So we're going to be back with that in just a few. Welcome everyone to our little break. It's just me and it's just you. You know, we can just talk. We can just see what's going on. Like for instance, that over on Twitch, Lumi Roo rated us. Thank you very much for that. The Progressive Defender gifted 5 subs. Crazy Hawaiian MPA gifted a sub as well. Thank you to all of you for helping out. We're Bane's CEO subscribed for the 3rd month in a row. Thank you for that. And MacBG gave 1,000 bits and said the most infuriating part of all of this violence is deep down knowing Tucker Carlson, Fox, Trump, Hannity, etc. are the source of the violence. They are, yet we all just pretend that they are not, and it's just crazy people. Perhaps because listening to bullcrap made them crazy. Well, look, I think they're certainly activators. They've helped to produce this aura of respectability and patriotism to injecting a bit of violence into politics. There's always people in America that are ready to kill other people. We're, as you know, Rashad we're born in violence. What's that?
I'm one of them. Please, you let me know I'm locked and loaded. I got you.
Okay, well, let's be careful. I'm glad you're over a computer. Just in case.
Whatever.
Anyway, okay, Gabby says in the member comments, I believe this is, a country whose capital suffers terrorist attacks every other month is usually regarded by history as a failed state. Yep, and what do we get? We get a few thoughts and prayers, and that's it. Tony Montana says, from our history and recent events, could it be argued that the United States has been built upon terrorism? Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
You're not allowed to teach that in certain states anymore. They've banned it, but a case can be made. Let's see. And Carlson is a lying mother Tucker says, why does law enforcement continue to do the PR work for criminals? There's been no investigation, so they have no grounds to speculate. I would also point out that they never seem to point out when a criminal is Christian, but they always sure to mention it when the perp is Muslim, even if they have no evidence to suggest any political or religious motives. Yeah, I don't know exactly where they got that information from. I guess, yeah, that's true. They would never point out like what church a Christian went to.
Yes, it's almost like how it was the thought that white is the default, and thus they won't acknowledge white, but they will acknowledge if it was a person of color.
Yeah.
So I assume that's why they do that. And it gives you the implicit thought that this person must be brown or not one of us or inherently violent, so on and so forth.
Exactly. Colorado Blue Blazer Regular says, I know it's kind of pointless, but why the hell are Democrats so incompetent at politics? Why the hell doesn't Pelosi make every single Republican Matt Gaetz? Ours keep defending that predator, so now every single one of them is Gaetz. Never stop saying it, never back down when they cry. The R's do it constantly for spurious reasons. Katie Hill, Al Franken, because it works. Force them to play defense for a change. Yeah, she seems, her response so far seems to indicate that she thinks that he's going down no matter what she does and that she wants to just step back and watch it. That's what I thought. But yeah, they should definitely be talking about it. He was immediately defended by other reps. In any event, we do have more news to get to, so we will be back right after this. Everybody, welcome back to the news. It's me, John Idarola, Rashad, and Adrian, and we've got so much news to get to. So why don't we jump into our next topic? We now have some basic information about the upcoming infrastructure bill, and we also have a bit about what the Republican Party is going to say and do as we get closer to that process. We have some statements from Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, never get sick of saying that. He says we have some big philosophical differences, and that's going to make it more and more difficult for us to reach bipartisan agreements, something that he always works so hard for. I'm going to fight them every step of the way because I think this is the wrong prescription for America. And earlier this week, he said it's like a Trojan horse, the infrastructure bill. It's called infrastructure, but inside the Trojan horse, it's going to be more borrowed money and massive tax increases on all the productive parts of the economy. Oh, I love him throwing around the term productive parts of the economy. Because of course the taxes are going to be on some corporations and the highest income individuals. So he is gonna leap to their defense. He is going to try to imply that this around $2.2 trillion infrastructure bill has nothing good in it. It is just tax increases. What do you think about the battle that's coming? Adrienne, what are your thoughts?
I think that the battle will largely be split along party lines and extremely unproductive, if you want to talk about unproductive. It's unfortunate because you have the GOP largely standing for corporations and preventing that additional taxation that would help us continue to build our country up and to use those resources. But unfortunately, because they're protecting that wonderful kind of wage income gap and any kind of class division there, I don't think that it's going to be in any way a productive exchange.
Yeah, the only issue that Moscow Mitch has with this is the fact that it rolls back the 2017 GOP taxation rule for the wealthy corporations and 1%. That's the philosophical difference. This is a good bill. This is, to me, the bill doesn't go far enough, but it has some good things in the bill. And we keep calling it an infrastructure bill, and it has some traditional infrastructure elements. 165 billion for roads, 621 billion for roads, 165 billion for public transportation. That's normal stuff. But then it has things like expanding Medicare for childcare providers. It goes on to address climate issues. So it has a lot in here. And the reason why it must have a lot in it is because you only get a few bites at the political apple when you have this filibuster US Senate, right? And so they have to cram things in these massive bills. Biden has to push it hard. You're gonna have to get it passed through reconciliation, and hopefully you can keep all of the Democrats in tow and make this happen. But you can't compromise with folks that literally don't give a damn about the other side of this conversation. So trying to get them on your team and on your side to negotiate this bill is a waste of time. And I hope Joe Biden has learned that his few days at the White House.
Yeah, and look, we'll see how the process goes and how many Republicans even pretend like they might get involved in the process. But we're not purely hypothesizing. Not a single Republican supported the COVID aid bill in the midst of a terrible pandemic. So we have some evidence from which to determine the likelihood that there will be bipartisanship. But that said, there is a split between Democrats. So you have people like Joe Biden saying, I'm going to bring Republicans into the Oval Office, listen to them, what they have to say, and be open to other ideas, like doing nothing. We'll have a good faith negotiation with any Republican who wants to help get this done, but we have to get it done. So he does stress getting it done. Pramila Jayapal, representative, says, let's not water down a bill for a party that's not actually interested in bipartisanship or wait for Republicans to have some awakening on climate change. Let's move with the urgency and boldness that this moment calls for. Let's go even bigger. This package can and should be substantially larger while investing in green infrastructure, renewable energy, and more. It's what we need in this moment. And I sort of feel like it's so unlikely that many Republicans will get on board. Maybe none of them will, but I know inevitably they're going to claim that they're going to want some of the credit for it. I saw a tweet from Madison Cawthorn talking about some of the funds that were going to different health clinics in his district from the COVID aid bill that he voted against. Seems a little bit dishonest, but this is gonna be even bigger. Like, so much money is gonna go to so many different areas. These bridges are not all in Dem districts. The roads aren't. The rural broadband probably mostly isn't. That's gonna be going to red areas of the country, and it's almost certainly not gonna get any support from Republicans.
No, it's not. And kind of to piggyback on what Rashad said, it's the Republicans are really objecting to raising that corporate tax rate to 28% because, hey, Trump got it down to 21 from 35 back in 2017. And, Trump had really pushed the thought that these corporate tax cuts would increase the average household income by some $4,000. That's not true. There was a 2019 study by the International Monetary Fund where they looked at who was benefiting most from these corporate tax cuts, and they looked at Fortune 500 companies. And they found that a whopping 80% of any kind of increased cash flow from these cuts in 2018 just went back into investor pockets. They did buybacks, dividends, asset planning adjustments. And since the majority of these corporate stocks, they're just held by the wealthy and foreign investors, this windfall business is really about funneling more money to the wealthy, and that's not something the GOP is willing to let go of, and thus it will allow everyone to suffer by going against this bill.
And this is what pisses me off about Democrats. What Adrian just said, Democrats have no true messaging around it. The majority of Americans who hear this, they will say, I don't like that. If you look at item for item that Democrats support, a large majority of the American population supports it. But Democrats have failed on the messaging angle of any of this. They can't get on the same page. And then when they do get on the same page, they don't message repeatedly. It becomes fragmented and disjointed. And this is where I blame leadership in the Democratic Party for failing to properly message. Republicans have mastered this. That's why they can tell a lie and keep telling that lie. And over again, people start believing the lie. Messaging is real simple. It's repetition. That's all it is. When you repeat a message, it becomes a brand. Brands are almost, you can't defeat a brand. You can defeat a message, but you can't defeat a brand. A brand is strong. And that's what the Republican Party has been able to do with their base. Democrats have failed to do so. And they have not only their base, but they also have independents and moderates who are willing to listen to a common sense message like that.
So Rashad, are you implying that Build Back Better isn't a rock solid brand identity?
Man, it's lame as hell.
And this would be the time for it with infrastructure.
No, it doesn't move anything.
Yeah, no. I'm going to keep an eye on his approval rating on different topics. He's still in that honeymoon period. With that said, he's doing well on most issues. Obviously not the border for some reason. I can't imagine why. But we'll see. We'll see. The COVID aid bill was very popular, despite Republican efforts for months to demonize around it. So we'll see. Now, in terms of what you could message around, like we said, I believe probably most people who might appear on this show would be in favor of massively expanding the size of this, and fingers crossed, maybe that'll happen. But even in the $2 trillion bill, it would rebuild 20,000 miles of rebuilt roads, repair 10 of the most economically important bridges, eliminate lead pipes and service lines from the nation's water supplies, which feels like that by itself deserves quite a bit more coverage than it's received so far, considering how many years activists have been pushing for that to be a goal. It's intended to do it. Shift to cleaner energy sources, modernize the electric grid, create millions of jobs, create 500,000 electric charging stations, resubsidize electric vehicles. We could just throw out a bunch of stuff like that. And that's at it being $2 trillion over a decade, 1% of GDP, far smaller than other big scale infrastructure bills in America's past.
That's right.
So that's what we have so far. I am curious, do you think there is a chance that once the House and the Senate get a hold of this, that it comes out of this process bigger than it's going in?
If it does come out of the process bigger, it's because the Republicans are going to want certain things in it. And for some reason, we're going to be in a position where we need to give it to them.
And will that earn any Republican votes, you think?
Possibly. I don't know.
I don't think it'll earn enough. I don't see this bill passing without just a simple majority. You got to go ahead and go through the process, file it under budget reconciliation to get your simple majority. And I even think then you're going to have a tough time getting a simple majority on this bill because of the conservatives that act like Democrats we have in the US Senate.
Exactly.
Yeah. I just hope the parliamentarian is in a good mood when this bill goes forward, because the future of America's infrastructure might come down to their recommendation, which we will treat as if it is like an adamantium promise. Anyway.
Wasn't that wild, man? Like all of a sudden, like everything was based on the parliamentarian, who, by the way, is not a constitutional position. It's not even a statutory position. It's once again, it's an office rule, and the person serves as someone who makes recommendations, not even as a director or executive at any level. And then Democrats are like, oh, I can't do anything. The parliamentarian said so.
Yeah, well, it's useful for some people. Excuses are useful, especially when someone with a title provides it. In any event, why don't we jump to our next topic? We're gonna mix things up a little bit and talk a bit about the border. Joe Biden has received a lot of criticism over his border policy. I think it's fair to say the vast majority coming from Republicans, but he has his critics among the Democratic Party and on the left as well. And AOC has been one of the most outspoken ones. So I want to show you a bit of video recently of Representative Ocasio-Cortez talking about some of the conditions that led to what we're seeing right now, zooming out a bit from the situation at the border as we see it today.
We have this surge, which people are saying, and we have to address that term because it is wrong. And people are pushing back, when we talk about this. And when they say that, the reason why we shouldn't use that term is because this is not an invasion. And in fact, when you want to talk about that, we should be owning the fact that US foreign policy has contributed to the destabilization of these regions and of the very countries that are now mired in a lot of violence that these families and these children are fleeing. So we cannot use that term, not to police it, not to be politically correct, but because we know what the level and the steps of dehumanization lead to. We just experienced this last year. And I'm not going to allow the Stephen Millers of the world to pretend that he didn't do what he did and to act like this is the same.
Exactly. So look, I think she's done a very good job of laying out some of the differences in the policy. But that said, she has also talked about the conditions there and described them as currently as barbaric, as horrifying. And so she is hardly a sort of just like getting in line Biden defender on this. And I think that's what we need, is someone who can acknowledge the splits from the past where they exist, but also acknowledge when they might not be as big as some might want to imply that they are. What did you both think?
Yeah, I think we are, as AOC seemed to acknowledge, we're out there causing some form of chaos. And then when the consequences come our way, we're like, whoa. We're not ready for this, or we're trying to reject it or act like we had nothing to do with it when the role we played helped enable the situation. And knowing that the Biden administration was on pace to take in more than 17,000 unaccompanied minors in March, that's wild. And I guess greater than the record set before in May 2019. And we need to be prepared for these consequences of our actions abroad and not try to pretend that it should not happen or that it's a deficiency necessarily innate in other countries, as opposed to a direct result of things that we've done.
Yeah, we have a question to answer in this country. Are we going to be a nation that's transactional, or are we going to be a nation that's transformational? When AOC talks, she talks from the heart. She talks from a position of righteousness. Right is right, wrong is wrong. And she's labeled a radical by those who do not talk from the position of right is right, wrong is wrong. Politics has become so ingrained in double talk and corruption that when a person comes to the Capitol with a clear moral compass, that person is problematic and that person is extreme. If we were to eliminate the politics of it all and just act as if we're having a simple conversation with AOC, we would say AOC is right and this other foolishness is wrong. But once you provide the context and the lens of politics, all of a sudden, right can be argued as wrong and wrong can be argued as right. I appreciate the politics of AOC. I think it's the politics of progression. And I think eventually our entire country and the narrative of this country will get to that point if we make the right decision while we're right here at the split in the road, because we are in the fight of the soul of this nation.
Well, why don't we demonstrate the difference between right and wrong in a quick little back and forth? So let's start with a bit more right. It's Friday. Let's start on a good foot. So AOC tweeted, a lot of people who are just now suddenly horrified at the dehumanizing conditions at our border are the same folks who dehumanize immigrants and helped build these cages in the first place. When we tried to stop this infrastructure over a year ago, we were overruled by both parties. And that was opportunistically jumped on by Ted Cruz, a guy who all of a sudden really cares about the border, saying AOC explains the real Dem position, abolish ICE, full open borders, which would make the Biden border crisis, which she is desperately trying to turn into a hashtag, even worse. She says nothing else works. Really, last year we had the lowest illegal immigration in 45 years. This year we have the highest in 20 years. And as I alluded to on the damage report, I can't tell what's difference between 2020 and 2021. There's probably nothing systemic about the year that influences international migratory patterns and all of that. But anyway, she responded saying, Ted, this is pretty rich coming from someone who fled their own home and responsibilities during an environmental crisis to cross the border and seek refuge in Mexico. Also, you funded cages, expanded cages, and yet you're complaining about cages. You have no policy, just puff, which I have tried to love more and found that I cannot. It is just perfect. And yeah, so he took his little trip to the border and he hid in the brush. And then him and Lindsey Graham took a little ride on a boat and they put on vests and they were strapped in to make sure that they don't fall over the edge and everything. And suddenly they really care about the border. They don't talk much about any of the individuals or what would happen to those individuals if they were moved from the bad circumstance they're in these facilities to then being thrown out of the border as they would if they could. But they want you to believe that they care about it, that it's something serious for them.
No, they don't care at all. They want to continue to do as they please, have the rules only apply to other people. And just like you had acknowledged, in him crossing the border, when Texas was going through dire straits, so he could go enjoy the benefits that are south of the Rio Grande. It's another example of the fact that we essentially have a nation that survives on hypocrisy, or at least in terms of our leadership. And they're not here looking to help the people at all or to make change, but rather to continue to fill their coffers and to play this us-them game.
Yeah, I lost all respect. And there's not a lot of people I can say this about, but I lost all respect for Ted Cruz when he let Donald Trump talk about his wife. And then he comes out hardcore on television saying, don't talk about my wife, this is blah, 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 like a tough guy. And then he becomes the greatest bootlicker of Donald Trump before the presidency and during the presidency. So I lost a lot of respect for that guy back then. Now he has the audacity to talk trash to anyone, especially AOC. He does not want the smoke from AOC. And Ted Cruz, one of the most, lack of a better word, hated individuals even inside of his own party because of his smugness and his arrogance and his unwillingness to believe that there's another way other than his way. So I don't like talking about the guy much, but we have to because he's in the news. But I have no respect for that dude.
Yeah. Yeah, every move with him is obviously some calculated thing that he thinks is going to benefit him in the future politically. And sometimes his instincts are right. I mean, he is still the senator, regrettably, of Texas.
Yeah.
But he's just such a nobody likes him. He's the Matt Gaetz of the Senate, honestly. Nobody in his party even likes him. And I get that. So he greets the new president. The new president comes in, they do a COVID aid bill that's quite popular. Vaccination is going ahead of schedule, which is popular. The infrastructure bill, once people start talking about it, it's probably gonna be pretty popular. So they need something. But honestly, shipping a whole bunch of Republicans, putting them on a little dinghy and floating them on a river, that just to me reminds me of their immigration policy, which they may not seem to understand this, wasn't popular. People did not like the Trump administration immigration policy. And this is their best thing that they can distract with. It's just his instincts just really seem off in this case. I'm glad that there's a lot of attention being put on the border, even by Republicans, because maybe some conservatives watching this, when they see some of the footage, will, for the first time, actually care for the human suffering and not just think of it as some sort of invading army storming our borders. Maybe we'll get a little bit of that, a little bit of like accidental empathy. But if it leads to a better policy, if it does put pressure on Biden, that's a good thing, because Biden is wrong. He's being like, it's an unprecedented number. I get it. They're being too slow. They have basically unlimited funds. They can house people in better conditions than they are right now.
Right.
And so Ted Cruz is awful. He's just the worst person. But hey, maybe accidentally, he could be a part of accomplishing something good here.
I doubt it.
Anyway.
Yeah. I was like,
yeah, he's still Ted Cruz, sure. But in any event, we are going to take our second break. When we come back, there is another Republican congressman who is being just burned to the ground once again by his own family. We will give you that footage after this. Let's see what you've gotten up to recently. Eclectic Miscellanea in the member comments says, another attack on the Capitol and more deaths should lead to a serious discussion of the systemic causes for Americans feeling like their government is against them and an attempt to tone down dangerous rhetoric on the right. But instead, the only thing we can hope is that the police aren't even more brutal now towards non-whites and that the surveillance state doesn't get even worse. Good point. Good point. In the super chat, Umberto Morero says, there's only so many heroes like Edwin Goodman. Yes. Well, look, I mean, these two Capitol Police officers just gave their life trying to stop this car. So let's bear that in mind. We, I think, better than most point out when the cops do the wrong thing, but sometimes they do die doing their job. And it's sad. Okay, Jen Elephant says, happy Friday, TYT. Loving this power panel. Will you guys be discussing MLB drama? People are defending the anti-voting rights bill now because they'd rather drink crappy beer rather than acknowledge blatant voter suppression. I'm not sure if that's in the second hour, possibly. That is a really interesting story, though. So I hope that we can make time for it. I also wanted to thank Just Freaking Ortega for gifting a sub, as well as Tell Me What to Put. Thank you to both of you. And Danielle for resubscribing for the second month says, I love TYT and I look forward to watching every day. Thank you, Danielle. Ozal subscribed for the 10th month and says, I love my community here on Twitch. Ozal, Thank you so much. We really do appreciate that. There's more comments. We'll get to them in future breaks. Thank you everyone who's been sending them in. And we've got more news for you coming right after this. Welcome back to the Power Panel with myself and Adrian and Rashad. We've got a couple more stories for you, and leading the second hour, switching it up on a Friday, Anna Kasparian is here. She's actually going to be leading that hour. Should be really awesome. Can't wait to see that. But before that, let's jump into something a little bit fun, if kind of sad. The family of GOP Representative Paul Gosar are once again calling him out, as they did with an ad when initially tracked, this time for his promotion of the big lie. Let's watch.
There is no one member of Congress more responsible for the attack on the Capitol than Congressman Paul Gosar. My name is Jennifer Gosar.
My name is Tim Gosar.
My name is David Gosar. I am Paul Gosar's brother.
Gosar is my brother.
My brother.
And he should be held accountable for all the lies he told
That led to the attack on the Capitol
on January 6th.
Immediately following Fox News calling Arizona for Biden.
There were rallies outside Maricopa County Clerk's office.
And Paul was right in the middle of them.
He's saying things like, we're going to fight to the bitter end. This is our Alamo.
This is our Alamo.
Paul's one of the first people to tell the big lie about Dominion voting machines.
Dominion seems to be set to changing Republican votes to Democrat.
And he tried to sell that lie every chance he could.
He should have criminal consequences, and if he's found guilty, should go to jail.
So those are, like, we're used to seeing politicians being criticized, and they're bringing the receipts. He did spread the big lie over and over and over again, like so many of his colleagues did. But there is something, and we were getting into this during the break, there is something about seeing it coming from family members that, it just kind of makes you a little bit uncomfortable, or at least for me. What did you think?
Oh, it doesn't make me uncomfortable at all. It makes me feel have a lot more confidence in humanity, because too often do we see people, whether it's their kin or their company or whatever, not speak out and not say anything, despite knowing that the person is problematic in various ways. And so to see these brothers and sisters band together to speak truth, knowing that it will come from an influential place, since generally, you stand by your family 100%, blood thicker than water, business, it really says that, great, their moral compasses have not been, derailed by virtue of the fact that they are related to this individual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, John, I have some cousins, man. They still owe me money. They're not going to get invited to the barbecue, but here's a guarantee. They're not going to sit and produce a commercial against me, right? What kind of POS is this individual to where your family will literally do a commercial against you and basically say in the commercial, you're a killer and you need to be in prison? And let's not forget that back in 2018, 6 of his siblings, not just 3, but 6 of his siblings endorsed his political opponent. This guy is beyond problematic. And when you hear his rhetoric, of course it lines up. And I agree with Adrian. I'm actually thankful that someone, even though it's a blood relative or blood relatives, they're able to see the kind of destruction that this individual can bring to a country. And they've decided not really to break rank, they've decided to unite. He broke rank. And they have launched a campaign once again against him. They were unsuccessful 2 years ago. They may be successful now.
Perhaps. I'm glad that they're doing it. I'm glad that, I don't think that we actually read it. I should have. In the previous story of AOC and Ted Cruz sort of going back and forth, she reminded him that his resignation was about 85 days overdue.
Yeah, that was cool.
It's just a reminder that, they spent months trying to overturn the election, doing media appearances, court things, all of that. State legislatures voting to try to take over the process. They sent rival electors. Like they did all of that. And then after all of that and all of it failing, then on the 6th, their people came and attacked. And then after that, their representatives and senators still tried to vote to overturn it. And it hasn't mattered at all. Some of the people who were dumb enough to try to overthrow the election at the Capitol that wore horns and stuff, they got arrested.
Yeah.
But those who wore ties, there hasn't been any consequences whatsoever. And that just seems so fundamentally wrong that after all of this, why not do it in the future?
Yeah.
What's the worst? Why accept an election in the future if there's no consequences to trying to overthrow it? If the only thing that determines whether democracy exists is just raw power, then just try it until you eventually succeed. And that's my fear, is that they're gonna come out of this not feeling chastised or worried about how the country might respond if they try to do it again, but just fired up to learn from this experience and try to be a bit more effective in the future.
Yeah, because how much have they suffered? Because even these individuals who did get arrested for the January 6th insurrection, I don't know of anyone saying I'm leaving the Republican Party or I'm no longer going to support this ideology. If anything, it almost solidified their beliefs even more, and that's a dangerous thing. But the reality is that there are no consequences. There is no deterrent, as you've noted. And so I do very much appreciate these family members speaking up and speaking out against their brother.
Yeah, and it's bigger than the election. They were trying to overturn democracy. And it's baffling to me that these individuals that attempted to overturn democracy, those individuals who voted to not accept the constitutionally mandated electors, and those who decided to launch these frivolous court hearings, saying that somehow democracy was wrong, how are they still part of the mainstream conversation? This is an attack on the country. And the individuals who got arrested for committing those acts of terrorism, they're getting arrested for real simple charges. Many of them, most of them, are not going to serve